Good morning, Key City Church. It is so good to be with you guys this morning. We're so thankful that you would join us. For those of you who are here for the first time, we're so glad to have you with us as well. It's such an honor to spend this time together. We're excited because this morning we're starting a brand new conversation that's going to be a really big conversation. In fact, it's going to be a conversation that is extending over the next 5 months. And what we're talking about in this conversation is this thing that we call formation. It is kind of the answer to the questions that we all tend to ask, which tend to revolve around: how do I experience life the way that I want to experience life? How do I get the joy that I'm looking for? How do I experience this thing called peace? How do I get this thing that we tend to call happiness, the kind of happiness that we mean when we just say, I want to be happy? Like, how do we get that? Like, how do we engage in our lives the way that we want to engage in our lives? How do we show up in our lives as the husbands that we want to be, as the wives that we want to be, as the fathers, as the employers, as the employees, as the neighbors, as the people that we want to be? How do we become known for the things that we want to be known for, in the way we want to be known by other people? Like, how do we get that? How do we get there? What we might often call the good life, right? How do we get the good life where we experience life the way that we want to, or what some of us might call potential? What we here at Key City Church, we actually call it here our God-given potential, right? And you don't have to call it that, but that's what we call it, our God-given potential, which is just what we recognize to be in every single human being, that within every single human being there is God-given potential. So it's to pursue and provide an approach for how do we get that? How do we do that? And so we're going to be having this conversation, like I said, over the next 5 months, which probably seems like a really, really big conversation. If that seems like too long of a conversation to entertain in your mind right now, just focus on the conversation that we're going to be having for the next 3 weeks, which is what we're calling BASECAMP. It's like kind of the starting point for that journey, where we're going to be creating some common ground, some common understanding, a point of reference, so that as we journey forward, we have this point of reference that we can continually point back to. We're going to be establishing this morning and over the next 2 weeks. This is going to be a little bit different than how we've done some of our messages in the past. Our messages have tended to follow along this line of, here's this problem we all have, here's what the Bible says about it, and here's what you do it, or here's how you do it and apply it to your life. It's going to be a little bit different. So if it feels different to you, just want to give you the understanding that this is going to be a little bit different, as you'll see today. It's going to be more informational. We'll be presenting more information than maybe we have in the past, because again, we're creating that common understanding. And this morning's going to be a little bit different, and I'll just give you a warning. We're not actually going to open the Bible this morning, which I know for some of you it's like, yes. But for others of you, like, I'm not sure we can call this a church if you don't open the Bible. So that's all welcome here. You might hate that, and that's fine. And if you want to have a conversation with me about that, I'd love to sit down and have a conversation about why we sometimes can talk for a really long time without referencing the Bible. But just so you know, the reason today is because one of the things that I believe, and we tend to recognize here, is that there's this thing called truth. Truth is the way that reality is. And there are different lenses we can look through to perceive and understand what truth is. The Bible is one of those lenses. It's a really critical lens. We own that. We love that. There are other lenses that we can perceive truth through. And we find it to be a very powerful thing when we look through other lenses, because what we find is all lenses that are focused on perceiving truth, if they are actually perceiving truth, they do this fantastic thing called converge, right? They all converge on what reality actually is, regardless of the truth lens you're looking through. And we find this very powerful dynamic when we perceive truth sometimes through the lens of our experiences, sometimes through the lens of other experiences, sometimes through the lens of just what we observe in the world. And we start to see how that converges with what we understand through the scriptural narrative and through the experiences of the scriptural witnesses. And it starts to put the pieces of this fantastic puzzle of reality together, and it helps us to see it more holistically and start to understand, wow, like these aren't just beliefs that were handed to me. This wasn't just a way of seeing things that was passed down to me. Like, this matches up with the other lenses through which we are perceiving reality. So that is what we're doing today. Like I said, to build a common framework. And trust me, next week we're going to get plenty of Bible. All the Bible that didn't get filled up on this week, I'll make sure to fill you up on next week. All right, so to start this conversation about this idea of formation, of how do we become the people that we truly long to be. How do we become our authentic selves, our full selves? Like, I think deep within us, we have this sense of there is this version of me that is the fullest, most authentic, and is achieving its potential version of me. How do I get to that? And to start this conversation about that, this thing that we call formation, what I think is a good place to start is, well, how have we gotten to where we are? Why is it that we're experiencing life the way that we're experiencing it now? Why is it that we're engaging in our lives the way that we're engaging in it now? How have we gotten to the point where we are now, especially the problematic points, especially the pain points, right? Especially those points that are kind of negatively valenced that we would like to change. Like, why are those things the way that they are? Because when we understand that well, when we understand what the root cause of those things are, then we have a better sense of how do we diagnose this, right? Instead of looking at the symptoms of, I don't like these things about my life, if we can get to the root cause, then we can do a more effective job at diagnosing exactly what the problem is and how do we address that at a root level. So today we're going to be looking at how have we gotten to where we are. Next week we're going to be looking at, well, what addresses this? What is it that holistically fixes this? So, to talk about how we've gotten to where we are, or if we put it in question form, why do you experience and engage in your life the way that you do? I'm going to suggest this, and you don't have to agree with this, but I'll explain why I think it's this. I would explain that the reason you experience and engage in your life the way that you do is because of the needs and desires within you, right? Within each of us are a set of needs and desires. And I think that's the starting point we need to start. All of us can recognize that we have needs and desires within us. That's pretty clear. Because if we didn't, we would just be inert, right? We wouldn't get off the sofa. If there wasn't something propelling us, motivating us into the world, into life, we would just sit. We'd do nothing. But the reason we engage in the world, the reason we interact in the world, the reason we perform actions in the world is because we're motivated, we're driven by some set of core needs and core desires. And we could go around the room and we could all, answer the question, like, what is it that you desire? And we could come up with lots and lots of different things that we desire, whether it's a better job or a bigger house or a nicer car or, better health, or we could come up with lots and lots of answers for the things that we desire. But I would contend that most of the desires that we have, if we were willing to be really honest and ask the question continually, well, why do I want that? And why do I want that? And why do I want that? I think we'd find that all of our varied desires would start to converge on a very common core set of basic needs that I think we all share together. In fact, we all share throughout our common humanity. We all are driven by this core set of needs. And if you've ever taken like a intro to psych course, or you've ever come across a person named Abraham Maslow, yeah, the hierarchy of needs. Have you ever seen like this hierarchy of needs? And you have some familiarity with this idea of core needs that are common to all people. There are different models for this. There are different ways of categorizing core needs. There are different ways of slicing this and bending this and putting these into different buckets. And in looking at the different models that are offered and in looking at a lot of different information, I have tended to categorize these and identify these core needs differently. You might identify them differently than I do. But if I were to like just nail it down today, here's where I land on what I think the cleanest, simplest set of core needs are that we find within ourselves. Within ourselves, we find these core needs. I think the first one's to be safe. We all want to be safe. We're driven by this need for safety. And that need for safety is probably the biggest bucket of all our core needs. It's where our core needs start, right? And at the very lowest level, our needs for physiological safety and physical safety. We want to be safe from harm, safe from danger, anything that would threaten our health or well-being. We want to be safe in the provision of physiological needs, like our access to food, water, clothing, home, just physiological needs. Safe also applies to our relational safety. We share a common need to feel safe with other people, and to be really specific, to feel connected to be even more specific, to be accepted by other people. Like within all of us, we find this wiring. We are wired for connection. We're wired to be accepted. In fact, if you look at an MRI of someone who's experiencing physical pain and an MRI of someone who's experiencing relational rejection, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference, because our brains experience physical pain and relational rejection in the same way, because we're wired to be accepted. We need relational safety. I think we also need emotional safety. And I've seen some psychologists refer to this core need, the need for emotional safety, as this need for soothing. This need to be able to soothe ourselves, to be able to ground ourselves in a sense of equilibrium, what we might call peace, that sense of, even if I'm not physically safe, even if I'm not relationally safe, I can bring peace to myself, a sense of emotional safety. In addition to that need for safety, we have a need for freedom. I would suggest, you don't have to agree with any of this, but I suggest we all have this need for freedom or autonomy. And like all of our needs, we become most sensitive and aware of our needs when we're deprived of those needs, right? Like we don't realize how much we need air until we don't have air. It's the same with all of our needs. We don't realize how much we crave freedom until we start to be deprived of our freedom. We start to be deprived of our autonomy, right? It's why we tend to pull away from relationships that become controlling, and we find ourselves losing our autonomy. It's why we find so much dissatisfaction in jobs where we're micromanaged and we don't have any autonomy to make decisions or self-direct on our own, because within us, within each of us, we have this craving for freedom. I would add to this list a desire to be seen. And this is one that I've just recently become more and more and more aware of, this desire, this common desire in all of us to be seen. There's something in us that wants to be understood, that wants other people to see the hurt that we've felt and experienced, that wants other people to see from our perspective. There's something in us that starts to feel really, really uncomfortable when we feel like nobody understands us or where we're coming from, or is judging our motives incorrectly. We become really uncomfortable. But I think that desire to be seen is an even bigger desire than that. It's this desire to create, to contribute to co-laborate in the world and in creation, to add something to the world, and not just to add something like into a vacuum or into a void, but to contribute something into the world that people enjoy, that people appreciate, to be a co-laborator, a co-creator in the world. It's what drives us to, and all the things that we do occupationally, the desire to build beautiful, elegant code, the desire to engineer with simplicity, the desire to provide customer service that just elates people, the desire to provide landscaping that allows you to just look back and see, this is so beautiful now, I just want people to appreciate this. We have this desire to be seen. And it's what Abraham Maslow would call our desire for actualization, this self-actualization. I think wrapped up in this is that desire to move towards our potential, to understand what is it that I have to uniquely contribute to this world system, to uniquely contribute to people that people would enjoy. We have in us this desire to be seen and to be enjoyed. So, I would suggest that from these core desires emanate secondary desires, secondary needs, and all of our other desires. I think we could trace back to somewhere within these core needs. And you might have other things that you might add to this list. You might have things that you take off. That's okay. In us, we have this common set of core needs. Now, our core needs are the engine that drives us in, propels us into our lives. Between us and our lives, between us and the world that we interact in, driven by our core desires, is what we're going to call, or I'm going to suggest we call, our interpretive lens, right? So our desires, our needs propel us into the world, and between us is this interpretive lens. You have an interpretive lens. I have an interpretive lens through which we see the world. And our interpretive lens consists of all of your internalized beliefs. Your internalized beliefs. And your internalized beliefs are the result of your lifetime of experiences. The internal beliefs that you've come to as a result of extrinsic things that you've learned, the things that you've been taught, the values that you were given growing up, the values and beliefs that maybe were handed to you in a system of faith that you were involved in as you were growing up, shaped your interpretive lens through which you see the world, as well as the intrinsic experiences that you've had. The experiences you've had in observing and seeing behaviors modeled and seeing values modeled for you. And the things that were demonstrated to you by parents or by peer groups along the way. You've had things modeled for you. You've had things done for you that have contributed to the interpretive lens through which you see the world. We've had things done to us that have impacted the interpretive lens through which we see the world. And each of us, each of you, has a unique interpretive lens through which you see the world. It's your values. It's the things that have shaped your conscience, that have established boundaries for what you perceive as inbounds and out of bounds, that have shaped the way that you see people and relationships. They're the experiences that you've had started in early childhood. In fact, this is fascinating to me, is that in early childhood, the capability of your caregivers to provide for your core needs contributes to the development of your interpretive lens. And if your caregivers, for whatever reason, were incapable of providing for your core needs in early childhood, that will create an interpretive lens through which you understand relationships later on. It will become very hard and difficult, if not addressed, to have trusting, healthy relationships later on in life because of the way your core needs were neglected in early childhood. The experiences that you have growing up. How you learn to connect in middle school and high school. How you learn to meet your need for freedom in college, adulthood. How you learn to meet your need for connection along the way. All these form our interpretive lens through which we see the world. Lots of them exist below our plane of consciousness. We don't realize the lens through which we see the world. We're usually not aware of it. And it's usually not the things that we would say that we believe, because a lot of times we say things that we believe, but they don't actually match up with our core internalized beliefs. They don't actually drive our behaviors, right? For instance, we might say, I like to think the best of all people. But then we find ourselves criticizing, judging, and guessing at the motives of other people. And so while we might like to think that we think the best of other people, we're functioning according to this deeper core belief that's the result of the interpretive lens through which we see the world. I'll get to that in a second. All right, our internalized beliefs. Here's what our internalized beliefs do. Our internalized beliefs tell us how to satisfy our core needs. So we're propelled into our lives by a set of core needs, and then through our interpretive lens that has developed over the course of our entire lives, our interpretive lens tells us how we meet those needs as a result of what has been modeled for us, as a result of the values that have been handed to us, as a result of what we've experienced and what has happened to us through our lives. Our interpretive lens tells us how we satisfy our core needs. Tells us, how do I find connection? Based on how we've learned to see people, based on how we've learned to see ourselves, we figure out, how do I satisfy this need for connection? Based on our experiences growing up, we learn, this is how I satisfy my need for freedom. I remember listening to someone who said that whenever he comes across somebody who just has a chip on their shoulder, who just always seems like they have something to prove to the world, who can never stand to be wrong, is going to fight tooth and nail to prove that they are right, his question is always, who was she? Which is a simple point that he's making, which is, somewhere along your life, there was someone who made you feel less than. And that person has caused you to believe something about yourself. It's created an interpretive lens through how you see your value and what it takes to be accepted. And that lens has driven the way you meet your desire for acceptance and seen the whole rest of your life. You have experienced entire past that have shaped your interpretive lens that shapes the way that you've learned to meet and satisfy your core desires. Let me add this as well, because I didn't say this before, this is so important. When we look at our core desires, to be safe, to be free, to be seen, any of those bad? Would we tell anybody it's not okay to want that? Like, it's wrong to want to be safe. It's wrong to want to be free. It's wrong to want to be seen. No. They're good desires. They're good desires. They're healthy desires. They're right desires. There's nothing wrong with our desires. But along the way, because of the way that our interpretive lens develops from our experiences, we learn to satisfy those desires in ways that are less than helpful. The other thing that happens because of our interpretive lens is that our interpretive lens is the lens through which our brain looks to determine if our core needs are being threatened. So your brain is designed for survival. It's designed to keep you alive, which is a great thing because guess what? You're alive, right? It's worked so far. Great, hooray. All right, your brain is designed to keep you alive, and your brain, to keep you alive, asks this constant question. And the question is, are we okay? Are we okay? Are we safe? Are our core needs being provided for? And your brain, without you telling it to, without you being aware of it, your brain is always asking that question. And your brain bases the answer on the data that comes in from your environment that gets filtered through your interpretive lens. So far, so good? So your brain is scanning your environment, and based on all of your experiences, your values, the things that you've been taught, the things that have happened for you and to you through your life, your brain interprets the data through that lens to determine, are we safe? Are we free? Are we seen? When your brain sees data that indicates, yes, we're okay, we have what we need, your brain enters into this state of safety and trust. The part of your brain that's called the prefrontal cortex becomes activated. And what's fascinating about that part of your brain is it's the part of the brain that's responsible for the things like connection, things like compassion, learning, growth, empathy, compassion. All these things come online when we're in a state where our core needs are provided for. And you felt this before. When you felt yourself just open and relaxed and comfortable. Maybe you had close friends over to your house, people that you know you can tell them anything and you're going to be safe with these people. They're not going to judge you. They're not going to hold it against you. And it just feels like, we're okay. Or when you got that news, remember, you had that thing that you were worried about. You weren't sure which way it was going to go, and you were so worried, you were so concerned, and then you found out, like, it's going to be okay. And you just felt like your worries and your fears just, you just take that deep breath. It's that feeling of safety. And when we feel that feeling of safety, our brain lights up the system that is responsible for compassion, connection, learning, curiosity, growth, all of those good things that help us grow. Or the other thing is if our brain looks into the environment around us and concludes, you know what, we're not safe. There's a threat here. There's something that's threatening our need for safety, our need for freedom, or our need for being seen. Your brain sends off the signals inside your brain and shifts into another system, which is our threat system, our fear-based, fear-driven system. It's our amygdala. It's the part of our brain that says something's wrong and we need to respond. We need to react. Because your brain, as wonderful as it is, as brilliant as your brain is, your brain doesn't know the difference between the threat of a bear, right, who wants to kill you and eat you, and the threat of a person who you love and feel close to and you feel rejected by. All your brain knows is threat, and in the face of threat, we're going to fight, flight, or freeze, right? One of our core needs is being threatened. I don't know if it's existential or not, and we are going to act. And what happens is our brain shuts off access to our higher order thinking, our prefrontal cortex, openness, connection, compassion. It's like we don't have time to shift resources to that. We're going to divert all resources towards response, to self-protection, to getting our needs met. And we felt this. We felt ourselves in those states. We felt ourselves in conversations with spouses. We felt ourselves in meetings at work. We felt ourselves cut off in traffic. And we feel ourselves start to close up and we get tight and we become reactive. We find ourselves in a triggered state. is a totally different system of our brain. And the focus is my core needs aren't being met, and I'm going to find a way to meet them. And I'm not really concerned about what the collateral damage is. So, we have core needs that propel us into the world. We have our interpretive lens that is how we understand the world. And as we seek to meet our core needs and ensure our core needs are met, based on the interpretive lens through which we see the world, we do indeed find ways to meet our needs. One way or another, those needs are so strong, they will be met. Most of us were not raised with an intentional approach to how to get our core needs met. It's just one of those things you figure out along the way, don't you? You figure out how to meet that core need one way or another, and here's what your brain does every time you do. Your brain says, good job, you met a core need. Do that again. Whenever you find yourself in this situation, do that action again. It starts to build a bridge. It starts to create a strategy, an approach that we use to meeting our core needs. And over time, that develops into deeply ingrained habits, or we could call them strategies, for how we meet our core needs based on the interpretive lens through which we see reality. Here's what we all know about those habits. A lot of those habits that develop along the way, when they first developed, they were adaptive. They were what we had to do, maybe just to survive. They were what we had to do with the resources that we had at the time, with what we knew at the time. It was the best way, the only way that we knew to satisfy real, legitimate needs. But what we find over time is those originally adaptive strategies to meet legitimate needs eventually become maladaptive strategies, right? The things that once met a legitimate need start to compromise other needs, don't they? Maybe there was a strategy that we once used to feel connected, to feel loved, to feel intimacy, but then later on found that that strategy wasn't a sustainable strategy. Maybe it only met short-term needs, but undermined long-term needs. Needs to feel safe and connected in the long term. Maybe we developed short-term strategies to feel freedom. Remember high school? Remember college? Remember the strategies that you used to feel and experience freedom? And then found that those initial strategies that were adaptive became habits that became maladaptive. And what once felt like it was bringing us freedom ended up costing us our freedom. The things that we had once done to feel emotionally safe, the only thing that we had, escape strategies through chemicals, escape strategies through the variety of escape strategies. Those escape strategies that were once adaptive, that helped us survive the lack of relational safety, the lack of physical safety. Those escape strategies eventually undermined our ability to connect, undermined our ability to self-soothe, undermined our ability to feel safe. Eventually, we find that those original habits that we developed to satisfy legitimate core needs become maladaptive. They affect us. They affect the way that we experience our lives. They affect the way that we show up in and engage in our lives. And we see them affecting other people. And eventually we wake up and we wonder, how did I become this? Where did this come from? Why do I continue to do this? And I told you we wouldn't open the Bible. We're going to open the Bible just to crack. In the Bible, this is what the Bible, the authors of Scripture, this is what they call sin, right? Sin is not the rules that God laid out and said, this is okay, this is not okay, that's sin. Sin is anything that is harmful to us or is harmful to others. God says, it's off limits because it's bad for you. Don't do that, right? We wake up one day and we realize that the strategies and habits we've developed for engaging in our lives are no longer good for us. But those habits are so deeply ingrained by that point. Those habits have a lifetime of reinforcement. Every time you engage in a strategy to satisfy a core need, that reinforces a neural network in our brains. And when we encounter that situation again, our brain says, oh, I know the path to solve this, and we walk down that path again. And like a farmer walking from his house to his barn, the more that path gets walked down, the more it gets worn down. The smoother it becomes, the less the grass grows there. And the more you walk it, the easier it is to walk that path. And then one day you wake up and realize, that is not an efficient path. This path isn't helpful. And you need to create a new path. Creating new paths is really hard, because there is reinforced neurology that is saying, but I know how to solve this. And it's the way that we always solve this. It takes a lot of intentionality to change that. Let me get to our next question because it unpacks this. So why don't we just change? One, because of the neurology that has been reinforced over a lifetime of meeting a core need a certain way. Two, the reason that we don't change is because those habits are meeting core needs. And if you take away that habit of meeting that core need, guess what? That core need is like a hungry baby bird. Its mouth doesn't just close because you took away the habit. That core need inside of you is still crying out, hey, I don't feel safe. I don't feel seen. I don't feel free. And if you don't fill me with something else, we're going to go back to what we've always done before. So figuring out, how do we meet those core needs? How do we meet those core needs without compromising other core needs? Because we've been given solutions before that might satisfy some needs, but it compromises others, right? Some solutions end up compromising our need for freedom and autonomy. We feel like it's taking away our individuality, and they don't last. And it doesn't change easily because the habits that we've developed are connected to the interpretive lens through which you see the world, the way that you've learned to see the world. Changing that lens is really hard because most of the time we're not even aware that that lens exists or what it consists of. Why don't we change our need for connection and the shroud of shame? Some of you are familiar with this. Sometimes we don't change because we don't recognize the things in our lives that need to change, because we have a core need for acceptance, right? And to confront the things that need to change threaten our need for connection. We can't look at the things that are broken or wrong with our lives because they're threatening to our need to be accepted by other people. If people saw this about me, if I owned this about me, if I gave this any attention, it's going to threaten how I see my acceptability, my ability to connect with others. And that fear of rejection, like we said, our brain interprets as pain. So our brain doesn't like to give any attention to the things in our lives that it interprets as things that could cause us to be rejected. Our brain says, don't look at that. Don't touch that. It's kind of like this. Have you ever played Operation, the kids' game Operation? Yeah. We played that with our family once, and I won't say which of my kids, but one of my kids, just became so nervous and anxious at that little buzzer that goes off when you hit the edge, just tears, break down in tears, she or he wouldn't even play it because it was so anxiety-provoking, right? It's like the metal connects with the metal, and it sends off that buzzer. It's just you just jerk away from it. That's what it's like with behaviors, the experiences, the perspectives, the attitudes in our lives that we feel would make us unacceptable. They're like that game of Operation. It's like if we go anywhere near it, it lights off this neurology of pain, and our brain says, don't touch that, don't go near that. We can't risk this, right? Because of that need for acceptance. Oh, it's so threatening to how we see ourselves. It's so threatening to how we want to be seen by other people. And so our brain says, don't go near that. Shame ends up shrouding the things, preventing us from being able to give attention to the things that actually need to change. So a lot of times we don't even wake up to the things that need to change. All right, why don't we change? Because the things that need to change are connected to our core needs, right? Like we said, you can't just take away something because that core need needs to be satisfied. You can't just take away from that core need. That core need is going to keep seeking satisfaction. So what we've developed is deeply habitual. Like we said, there's a neurology behind it. Why don't we just change? Because it's connected to our interpretive lens. Why don't we change? Because often the strategies for change that we're given are fear-based strategies. They're strategies you need to change because if you don't, you're bad. Because if you don't, people won't accept you. Because if you don't, something bad is impending if you don't change. And fear-based strategies for change don't work. Why don't we change? Because often systems for change, approaches to change are isolated from community, which is why the self-help business is so successful, right? Because a self-help book is great. How many of us have read one self-help book, and at the end of it, we're like, that's incredible. This is so helpful. If I just apply this to my life, this will be so, and a month later, we're like, this is great. But then 2 months later, it's like, what? What book? I don't remember. It's gone. It's gone, right? That is the result of approaching change independently or in isolation. It doesn't last. And this is simultaneously why there's such a huge boom in group training. If you're familiar with all of the different gyms that open up where you can take classes with other people and train together. Yeah, this is really successful because we thrive in community, right? We are more likely to show up if we're showing up to a community. We will push ourselves harder if we're pushing in the midst of a community. We feel more supported when we're engaged in change in the context of community and when we're doing it shoulder to shoulder with other people who are joining us on this journey towards becoming. When all these things are met, when all these things are satisfied, here's the thing about change. It's just this really, really natural thing that just happens. When we approach change holistically, accounting for the variety of our core needs, when we pay attention holistically to all of our needs, when you pay attention holistically to all of your needs and all of you that makes you you. We could get away from calling them core needs and for the sake of Amber, call them our soulish needs, the needs of our soul, the needs of your soul. When you approach those holistically, and when we approach it intentionally, right? We don't drift into transformation. We don't coast into transformation, right? There has to be an intentionality about it. When we approach it holistically, when we approach it intentionally, we experience growth naturally. It's just what happens. It's what I believe. It's in you. I believe you're made for it. It's like taking a seed and putting it in the ground. If the conditions aren't right for that seed to, for the changes to catalyze, for that seed to actually sprout, if the conditions aren't right, it won't do anything. And you can yell at it all you want. You can be strict with it all you want. You can get it all the information about what it needs to do that you want. It's not going to do anything. But you create the conditions in the ground. You create the right temperature. You give it the right pH balance. The most natural thing in the world for it to do is to grow. You can't stop it from growing. It's going to grow in the right conditions. Imagine a tree. All trees know, just grow towards the sun, right? Get water and get as much sun as you can. Grow towards the sun. We are like trees. We can't help but move towards the sun, towards the core needs that are planted within us. All we know is satisfy our core needs, and we are going to satisfy those core needs no matter what. But depending on our interpretive lens, depending on the habits that we've developed, the ways that we have to grow to satisfy those needs become really strange and awkward. If you've seen a tree in a forest and looked around a forest, like a crowded forest of lots of trees, you will find the trees competing for sunlight however they can get it. You'll find trees growing at just preposterous angles. It's like, how does it even stand up? It's growing out of rock. Like, it's growing sideways. That's not what a normal tree looks like. Tree's like, I'm just trying to get sunlight. We look across the diversity of humanity, of people, and we see people, and it's like, how does a person become like that? They're just trying to get sunlight, trying to get their core needs met. When we learn how to satisfy our core needs holistically and intentionally, it's like a tree that has ample sunlight. Just grows healthy. All it knows how to do is to grow. It's just natural. It's natural. And our contention, as we get into this process and we start unpacking this, we believe this is creating that soil that allows us to just grow naturally. It's like learning how to find the sunlight that just allows us to grow healthy. It's just what happens. It's the most natural thing in the world for us to do when we learn how to establish and create the conditions. We're going to be talking about that next week. Again, I told you we're not going to open the Bible. We're going to just open it to crack just a bit, because remember when he said, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, I will give you rest for your souls. I believe that the transformation, the formational process that God is inviting us into is an intentional process, but it's a process that feels like rest for our souls. And when we discover it, when we enter into it, the most natural thing in the world for us to do is to change and to grow and become. And that's the journey we're looking forward to unpacking with you guys as we continue on in this conversation. Let me pray for us. Father, we are so grateful for you, so grateful for the lives that you're inviting us into. So grateful for your patience and your grace all along this journey. So grateful for the wisdom that you want to share with us. as you continually invite us into this life that you intend for us to experience. That's the life that we all long for. We love you and we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.